Biscuits, and we're making them from scratch. A few things that we haven't done in here before. We are going to use our scales. Okay, so on our scales, what we're going to do is turn them on. Okay, all of you guys have scales. They're in your stations, kind of to the right of your ovens. We turn them on, and it comes on at 0. If I want to place something on here to weigh it, okay, these the displays pull out. Can you guys see in the mirror out there? Okay, the displays pull out, and you can see that this is reading 1 pound 8 1/8 ounces. So if I were to try to weigh something in here, I can either subtract it out and figure out how much I got in there, or all of them have a key that makes this go to 0. It's also called tearing it, so T-A-R-E. You can tear this and make this go to 0, so then anything that I weigh in here is going to be only what the ingredient is and not the weight of the bowl. Okay? Any good biscuit recipe that I've ever seen uses both bread flour and all-purpose flour. I know we talked about that before, and they almost always use them in equal portions. Okay, so it kind of balances out the gluten and the protein percentage to something that we're looking for our biscuits. So you guys are doing a quarter of that recipe, so we're going to do 6 ounces of all-purpose flour. And I'm just going to weigh it out, and yes, I'm going to try to get it exactly to 6 ounces. So that's a little over. If I get a little over, I'm just going to scoop it out until it's right. Okay? And up. It's being a little contrary. There we go, 6 ounces. Okay? And now if I were to try to do that again, if I put the bread flour in there, and I were a little over and I tried to get that out, there's nothing to guarantee that I'm only getting out bread flour. So what I'm going to need to do is use a different container. Can you grab me a paper plate, please? An extra paper plate. So if I set this aside and then I weigh each ingredient on like an individual paper plate like this, then if I need to adjust it, I'm not worried about trying to messing up my formula and messing up the recipe here. So if I start right here, then I'd be way off. So all I have to do is 0 it again. Now this weighs nothing, and whatever I weigh on top of it, it's going to be just right. Again, 6 ounces. Remember, equal parts here. Be nice. There we go, 6 ounces. Then I'm going to take this and just go ahead and dump it in here because I know it's right. Then I'll just use this same plate to weigh the next thing. Okay, making sure that it is back at 0. So the next thing on there, I believe, is baking powder. One thing when we're making our biscuits, the way, basically our technique is we're going to put all of our dry ingredients together, mix them together. Then we're going to add our fat, which in this case is going to be whole butter. And then we are going to add the liquid ingredients as our last step before we all mix them all together. And we do that in a very specific way for really a specific purpose. Okay, so the next thing I believe is sugar. Right? Well, maybe not next, but that's one of our dry ingredients. So our sugar, we're going to add 1 ounce of that, a little much here. Okay? Actually a lot much. Now, on your papers the other day, you had a question that said, what is more accurate, count, weight, or volume? And the answer is always weight, okay? And we're going to see some examples of that today. If I were to try to get a volume ounce or a fluid ounce of sugar, that would actually be 2 tablespoons, and that would be way different than our 1 ounce here. It'd actually be quite a bit more than this 1 ounce of weight ounce, okay? The same you'll see in a minute with our buttermilk. Our buttermilk actually asks for fluid ounces, in which case that's a volume measurement. Now, you see there on your recipe it says 3/4 of an ounce of salt. If I divide that by 4, it's 3/16. Okay, this scale is not quite that accurate, and sometimes when we break one down that small, we have to go to some of our basic, a pinch of salt, and that's really all we're going to add. And I'm literally going to grab a pinch of salt here, okay, and throw it in there. Okay, a little over the shoulder, and good luck. Okay, just to add some extra. All right, so we're just literally adding a pinch of salt, and that is all of our dry ingredients. Can you put this back with the bread flour? The bread flour I actually have over on our station over there. for you guys. It's usually located over here to the right if you need it. Alright, so now we have all of our dry ingredients here. What I'm going to do is mix this all together. And I just want to mix this all together so I have a good even consistency of our dry ingredients. And now we're ready basically to add our butter. Thank you, sir. We're going to add our butter. Now one thing when we're adding our butter here is we want this butter to be cold and hard. Okay, we don't want it to be soft. We don't want it to be room temperature for a very specific reason. Our butter here is our secondary leavening agent, the thing that helps it to rise. Okay, our primary one is actually the baking powder. We want to make sure when we do this recipe too that we make sure it's baking powder, not baking soda. Those are two very different things, and they really do affect your baking in very different ways. Your baking powder will act twice, basically when it contacts liquid and also when it cooks, and your baking soda, I believe, only acts when you're doing when it contacts liquid. Okay, so if I were to read my recipe from my baking and pastry book, it actually says to do 1-inch cubes, which are which are about this size. So those are big cubes for making this recipe. It works when you're trying to make 40 biscuits. It doesn't work so well when you're only trying to make 10. So I want to break these up a little bit more. And I'm going to make little cubes out of these. So I cut it into quarters first, and then we'll break these up into our cubes. Okay, so you can see these come into nice, beautiful cubes. They're so pretty. They make me happy. Okay, so these little cubes here. And then what we're going to do is we want these cubes of butter or fat to get coated in the flour. Now I told you it acts as our secondary leavening agent. Basically what happens is as these cook from cold hard, it starts to separate. And what separates out is you've got water, milk solids, and butter fat in here. And the water, basically the steam, helps to cause the ingredients to rise and puff up a little bit. Along with that baking powder. So what I want to do, and my goal here, is actually to have each of these little cubes of butter to be coated with a little bit of flour. Okay, and that helps to keep them separate from each other, and it actually helps to keep it separate from the liquid a little bit too as we mix that in here. Okay, so now once we are going to get our hands in this today. So once we get the flour in here and get it all tossed, then we're going to be ready for our liquid ingredients. Okay. So we just want to toss these cubes of butter in the flour a little bit, and that's part of the reason that we mix all the dry ingredients, because if I just threw it in there, then you could actually have some like baking powder stuck directly to the thing, or just sugar, and we want it to be the whole mixture. Okay, so I'm going to mix it together. I'm going to kind of make a well. When I make a well, I make the sides higher than the middle. And then we'll be ready to add our liquid ingredients to it. Okay, so our liquid ingredients in this case are going to be eggs and our buttermilk. Okay, so that says fluid ounces of buttermilk. So we are going to measure it by fluid ounces. And a quarter of that is going to be 6 ounces. Okay, buttermilk is thick. Don't try to drink it. Okay, it's slightly soured. I mean, that's what buttermilk is. Okay, and then I'm going to add my egg to this. Now, the recipe calls for 8 ounces of eggs. Okay, back to that discussion of which is more accurate. Okay, if you look at the eggs, these are slightly different sizes, right? So most recipes will call for a count. It'll say 1 or 2 or 3 eggs. Okay, but that could all be very different. So a count is not nearly as accurate as a weight like that. Now for our purposes today, because we're not going to waste a lot and we're not making these biscuits professionally, most chefs say that 2 ounces of egg equals 1 large egg or 1 extra large egg. Okay, they're actually slightly less. It takes about 8.5 or 9 eggs to equal 9 ounces. Okay, but we're not going to measure out just a partial egg. So today what I want you to do is 1 egg is going to equal 2 ounces for you, and that's a pretty good equivalent. I'm going to crack my egg right in here. Get rid of that. And I'm just going to use my little whisk here and break up the egg. I'm just kind of breaking down the structure of it and mixing it up in here. Alright, so now we are going to get our hands dirty a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to pour this right down in the center here. Try to scrape out as much of this as I can so it all gets in there and the recipe stays fairly accurate. Alright, so when I get in here to mix this up, kind of like our theory the other day when we were making our pizza dough, if I keep some flour on my hands or the dry parts on my hands, it keeps my hands from getting in here too much or getting too messy and dough sticking to my hands. Because I'm mixing this by hand, yes, dough's going to stick to my hand. But what I try to do is I try to scrape down on the sides where it's dry, okay? And so far I really don't have much on my hands. I will. And I try to keep one hand out, one hand in. And then as I mix this, if I can just try to keep my hands in the dry ingredients, it really helps to keep them from sticking everywhere and getting all over my hands and doughy all over my hands. Okay? Alright. So you can see we still got our big chunks of butter in here. I really haven't manipulated them too much. Okay? And I do have stuff on my hands. I'm just going to go ahead and get that off. Try to get it back in the recipe here. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to turn this out onto the board so I can work with the rest of it. Okay, when I say turn it out, all that means is basically dump it out. In this case, if I had a dough and it was stuck to the bowl and you've mixed up a dough, when they say turn it out, you actually have to kind of roll it out of there. So that's why they say turn it out of the bowl. Okay, and in this case, we're going to put it right on our surface here. All right. I'm going to put it right on our surface. You can still see we have these big chunks in there. Just like we used our trick with the dough, I'm going to get a little bit of extra flour here on my hands and a little bit on the dough to help me keep from sticking to it so badly. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press this. I'm simply going to press this. Could I use a rolling pin? Sure I could. But it works just as well with our hands. I tried to keep it squared up. And I told one of my last classes, think of making a plateau, not a hill, not a mountain, like a good, proper plateau, straight sides up. It kind of helps it all to go together better. Okay, so you see that I press it down this first time. Okay, so that's one time. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fold it 3 times, and I fold it exactly in half. And this first time is going to be kind of hard because it's still kind of a mess. It really hasn't turned into much of a dough yet. But I'm just going to get all these pieces back in here, and especially this chunks of all this dry goodness because I need it all in here. Okay, we'll move this around a little bit. Now I'm going to press this down again. Okay, basically back to about twice its size. And each time that I do this, this is going to form a more and more consistent dough. Okay, and this is our biscuit dough as we go. So that was one fold. Fold it again, and it's already holding together better. Okay, we still have some of these dry ingredients here on the bottom, and that's okay. They're also helping to keep it from sticking. All right, so that was my second fold. Again, I'm pressing it down. Now, also when I'm doing these folds, I'm developing layers within the biscuit. Now, this is not one of these flaky, laminated biscuits that you guys get out of the can. Okay, it's a different type. These are the buttermilk biscuits. But you use a very similar technique for developing the layers in those kind of flaky biscuits. All right, and then one more time, and you can already see that that's holding together much better than it did originally. I can still see my big chunks of cold hard butter, and that's okay. That's kind of part of what we're going for. We need those to act as our secondary leavening agent, and it will not adversely affect our biscuits here. All right. So I'm trying to make a very, very even sheet here, and that was the 3rd time, so that's going to be the last time. Okay. So what I'm going to do here now is rinse my hands off first. Now I'm going to use a biscuit cutter. If you guys look back at your recipe, the recipe actually says that it yields 40 biscuits, but there's a disclaimer up there. That's 40 biscuits at 1.5 ounces of dough per biscuit. Okay. If you make your biscuits smaller than that, then you're going to have more biscuits. If you make them bigger than that, you're going to have less biscuits. Okay? It makes total sense. Now, if I use a proper biscuit cutter, which I'm going to, your recipe is going to be right at 1.5 ounces per biscuit. So, this is a proper biscuit cutter, and as long as the biscuit dough is just about as thick as this, they're going to turn out to right at 1.5 ounces. Okay, I have other ring cutters, and you guys can use whatever you want for them, and they all have their own purpose. Okay, this one is a little bit bigger than this, so it would end up giving you less. This one is a little bit smaller, so it'd give you some more, and this one's real small. Okay, you can make nice little petite mini biscuits, and you can do a nice little breakfast buffet with that kind of stuff. So they have their uses. But we're going to use a proper biscuit cutter today, and we get a little bit of flour on it. Now, we're going to put these directly on our sheet trays. One thing you guys need to do, and don't forget to do it, even though I forgot to do it, turn on your ovens. The temperature's on the board. It's 425 degrees. We're going to use our parchment paper today. Okay, parchment paper is basically down the hallway, just immediately on the right. There's a big container of it. This parchment paper is actually made to fit a full sheet tray. Okay, so our full sheet tray. Our ovens are not commercial ovens, so they don't fit a full sheet tray. So that's why we have this half ones. Okay, everyone's are on their stove top because they used them last period and they're still hot. Okay. So you can fold this in half, you can cut it with a knife, you can cut it with scissors. I actually like to take it, crease it, and then if I put it on the edge of a countertop, okay, you can actually get a pretty good rip here, almost as if it was coming off like a roll, like of saran wrap or something. Okay, so it fits right in here. All right, so it fits right in there. So now we're just going to go ahead and cut our biscuits and get them ready. So for that, I'm going to try to go all the way out to the edge and minimize what's left here and see how many biscuits I can cut out of here. I'm probably going to get between 6 and 7. Looks like only 6. Okay. All right. Yeah, I could try to get that, but it's not going to go well. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on. Now, when I put my biscuits on here, I like to have them touching slightly. I find that biscuits, if you separate them completely, especially homemade biscuits, they don't always rise evenly, especially when you've got these big chunks of butter and they're in different spots. But when they're touching, they tend to rise very evenly and together. And I think they just provide each other with a little bit of support. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Now, I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but in this dough, we've really kind of created some layers by that folding process. Okay, so when I bring this back together to try to get the rest of them out of there, I don't want to just ball it up and kind of restart because I'll destroy those layers and we're going to put them in all different perspectives. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of bring this together and try to maintain that layering as much as possible. And then I'm just going to press it down and I'm going to fold it to get rid of these extra edges and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and fold it again. And I'm really just trying to get some of those dry ingredients on the bottom so the butter doesn't stick to it. Now, the more you handle this, basically the uglier these biscuits are going to look. And the reason we don't want to handle these too much is we don't want to develop the glutens. Like when we make the pizza, we want to develop the glutens. We want it to be stretchy and make a nice bread. This biscuits, we want them to be a little more flaky and not quite as stretchy as that was. All right, so again, I want to make sure this is about the thickness. Just getting a little sticky. I want to make sure this is about the thickness of the cutter. And then I'm going to continue to cut biscuits out. All right. And here we go. Okay, 3 more. That gets us to 9. Now, I can pretty much promise you that when these are done baking, you will be able to tell which ones were from the first cut and which ones were from the second one when we mashed it back together, and even the third one here. Again, I'm trying to make sure it's the same thickness so these biscuits end up being about the same size. There's 10, okay? So that gives you a total of 10 biscuits all touching each other. They're going to be just fine, and then I'll make you one ghetto biscuit out of this. Okay? So cute. Little ghetto biscuit, so nice. All right, so we don't waste any, which is probably what I'd be doing at home. I'm not just going to waste it. I know chefs that will only do that first cut and then they'll throw the rest away. Now they make them so much they know exactly what size and they maximize it. They don't have a ton of waste, but they don't like the second cut and how it looks and how it finishes. Okay, so there we are. We've basically got them finished. We just have one more little step. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are going to do a little egg wash on top of them. Okay, this is going to help keep them from looking quite so ashy. All right, and it'll help to look really good. So what I'm going to do for that is I want to use an egg yolk only egg wash. Okay, so I don't want the egg whites. When we're making biscuits, these egg whites can tend to give it actually an eggy smell and taste to it. So I don't like to use the whole egg for that. This is the way that I learned to separate eggs from my mother long before I went to culinary school, and it's how a lot of chefs still do it, or bakers still do it. They actually separate it using the shell. Okay, and you just let the egg white fall off. Okay, and then you get this part left. You get the yolk left, and we are keeping the yolk. Now, the reason I like this is everybody actually has a tool in your station above the sinks for separating eggs. One of the reasons I don't like those is if my egg yolk were to happen to break there, it'll go right through those, and then you basically lost your whole separated egg. Okay, when you do them by hand like that, you almost never lose it. So I kind of like just to do it by hand. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of cool water to this to help thin it down. If I were to just use the yolk, it's awfully thick. It will provide a much better color if I just use the yolk, but I don't want it to be quite that thick. And I'm not trying to add like an eggy flavor to the biscuits. Okay, so what I'm going to do is by brushing this, it's going to help it from being so ashy. Any of that kind of raw flour that you see on top is going to look real powdery when it comes out if I don't do anything to it. Okay, this is going to help them brown, and I'm really not trying to get a ton of egg everywhere. Okay, just trying to brush them up, make them look real nice before I go in there. All right, then we are going to put them in the oven. We're going to put them in there for 15 minutes. Okay, they don't take long, especially at this high temperature. And if I were you, I would have them on the top rack. Like I said, that butter separates and you get some of that steam that lifts it, but also when it separates, because they're in the big chunks that they are, some of the butter tends to run out into the pan, the oil in particular, which is nice because it actually helps to crisp the bottom of them up really well. And so you have a nice crispy bottom to the biscuits. All right, so here we go, right into the oven, top rack. Remember, hot air rises. It's actually the middle rack. And that'll help the tops to get nice and brown. 15 minutes, and that's going to be it. Okay, you guys need to get started so you can get them in the oven on time. Thank you. Yes, you are in your same groups. It's fine with me. Who was sous chef last time? We didn't have a sous chef last time? Who was it the time before that?
The person was absent.
I remember last year I was doing something, I was just using the iPad just to so I could see something on my iPhone.
Yeah.
And he thought that was amazing. So,
You just need a couple seconds.
yeah, it was good.
We're incredibly confused.
Okay, why is this?
Because it says 6 food ounces, but
Okay, there's 4. Ready?
No, yeah.
No?
Now it's recording.
Okay.
is that it?
Put them right here.